A quiet shift is happening beneath the noise of modern dating, and most people miss it because they're still using old language to describe new conditions. Single is still treated like a temporary problem, like a waiting room, like proof that a man's life hasn't started yet. But by 2026, that framing isn't just outdated, it's strategically dangerous. Because the real question is no longer why a man is single. The real question is whether he understands what that state can be used for. For decades, the script was simple. A man without a partner was missing something, and a man in a relationship was settled. Society praised attachment as progress and treated solitude as failure. Now look at what's actually happening. One man lives alone, wakes up early, trains consistently, controls his money, and directs his attention toward work that compounds. His routine is stable. His energy is predictable. His mind is mostly undisturbed. Another man has the label taken, but his internal state tells a different story. His schedule bends around emotional negotiations. His focus gets fractured by the need to explain himself. His time isn't really his. His baseline mood depends on variables he cannot control. That contrast is not love versus loneliness, it's agency versus diffusion. And in 2026, agency is the advantage most men are quietly choosing, whether anyone approves of it or not. Modern singlehood, when chosen consciously, is not a pause before life begins. It's a controlled environment. It's where habits get installed without compromise. It's where standards get clarified instead of bargained away. It's where emotional regulation gets tested without the drug of constant reassurance. It's where you learn what you actually want, separate from what you were trained to chase. But a lot of men don't get the benefit because they approach being single with resentment or embarrassment. They treat it as a defect to hide, not an asset to build. So they never extract its value. They rush toward connection, not because alignment is real, but because social pressure is loud. And they trade temporary discomfort for long term instability. If you want a smarter frame, here it is. Being single is not the absence of a relationship, it's the presence of space. Space to observe patterns, space to correct weaknesses, space to build a life that doesn't need constant validation to function. Once a man stops treating the state like a flaw, his behavior changes immediately. His decisions slow down. His tolerance for chaos drops. His standards become measurable. And once that shift happens, singlehood stops feeling like something to escape. It starts behaving like a tool, one that prepares him for every decision that follows. Now let's talk about the pressure that tries to steal that tool from you. It usually doesn't show up as an obvious threat. It shows up as casual comments, half jokes at family gatherings, comparisons disguised as concern. You're still single? Time's running. Options narrow with age. Don't wait too long. Repeat it enough. Those lines harden into an invisible deadline. And what makes that deadline effective isn't evidence, it's repetition. Even when reality doesn't support it, the fear starts shaping decisions. Men start entering relationships not because there's true fit, but because being alone feels socially risky. Being alone gets framed as a failure. Being chosen gets framed as proof. And under that framing, choosing wrong feels safer than choosing nothing. That logic destroys men because rushing doesn't eliminate risk, it concentrates a risk. Here's how it typically happens: a man commits to quiet the internal noise. He tells himself attraction will grow, differences will smooth out, discomfort is normal. And for a while, he can maintain that story. Then, months pass, then years, then misalignment becomes undeniable. And now leaving is expensive. shared routines, financial entanglements, social expectations, emotional investment, possibly kids. What began as a move to avoid being alone turns into a situation that erodes clarity and momentum. This is what men don't calculate early enough. The cost of a wrong partnership isn't just emotional, it's structural. It changes your calendar, it changes your sleep, it changes your finances, it changes your nervous system, it changes your capacity to build. A rushed decision doesn't just create relationship problems, it creates life drag, and life drag compounds. Now, let's correct another misconception that pushes men into bad choices: the belief that age reduces a man's leverage. That idea ignores how value actually compounds for men. Experience sharpens judgment. Discipline increases earning power. Emotional restraint gets refined. A man who spends years building stability, competence, and self trust does not shrink with time. He consolidates gains. What disappears isn't opportunity. What disappears is tolerance. He becomes less willing to accept chaos, inconsistency, disrespect, and emotional volatility just to fill a role. So if you feel like you're getting pickier, that's not always fear. That's often growth. The real loss isn't missing a relationship opportunity. The real loss is losing the ability to choose deliberately. Fear collapses perspective. It labels patience as procrastination. It labels discernment as avoidance. But patience is exactly what prevents expensive errors. The men who suffer most are not the men who waited too long. They're the men who moved too fast for the wrong reasons. And here's why. Being alone exposes you, which is exactly why it's valuable. It reveals which desires are genuine and which are inherited anxieties. When you can sit with yourself without immediately trying to escape, you regain control over your timeline. You stop reacting to external clocks. You choose based on fit, not fear. And that is the beginning of real leverage. Now, we need to say something that's unpopular, but true. The idea that any relationship is better than none collapses under inspection. Some connections don't add stability or meaning. They simply replace one discomfort with another. Loneliness is visible, so it gets sympathy. Misalignment inside a relationship is quieter, often normalized, and far more corrosive. Because it drains you while you're still doing the right thing. Men aren't trained to calculate this difference honestly. So let's calculate it. The hidden costs usually start small. Routines erode. Not because you're lazy, because you're managing tension. Training sessions get skipped, not from exhaustion, but from the desire to avoid conflict. Work projects get delayed, not from lack of ambition, but from the need to be present in ways that never feel fully acknowledged. Your decisions become conditional, not because you're respectful, but because you're bracing. You learn to check someone else's mood before you act. You start editing your personality. You stop voicing opinions. You stop initiating certain activities. You're not trying to be fake. You're trying to avoid punishment. And then slowly, you become smaller. This gets mislabeled as maturity, but a lot of the time it's contraction. It's self-protection disguised as compromise. Compromise is healthy when it's mutual and aligned. It's corrosive when it's one-sided and fear-driven. Because commitment that requires self-erasure isn't progress. It's compliance. And the danger is how slowly it happens. There's rarely a single moment where you can point and say, "That's when I lost myself." It's a series of reasonable concessions. One missed workout, one delayed goal, one silenced preference, one apology you didn't owe. Each one seems minor, but the accumulation reshapes identity. Eventually, the man can't clearly articulate what he wants. He can only articulate what he must avoid triggering. That's not partnership, that's management. A relationship should expand capacity, not narrow it. If involvement consistently reduces your energy, your focus, and your self respect, it's functioning as a drain, not a support. And the presence of another person does not automatically justify the exchange. Peace traded for tension is not a fair deal. Now, here's where the conversation gets practical. A man who hasn't learned to stand firmly within himself will always be vulnerable to external forces. His mood, direction, and sense of worth will shift based on other people's reactions. That's why deliberate solitude becomes training. It removes distractions. It exposes what remains when approval, attention, and reassurance are absent. What emerges isn't weakness, it's information. And the discipline is learning to separate what you can govern from what you can't. You cannot govern someone else's moods. You cannot govern their interest. You cannot govern their emotional fluctuations. If you try, you will trade energy for anxiety. But when you withdraw that effort and redirect inward, stability follows. Daily structure becomes non negotiable. Sleep, training, work, financial order. You handle them regardless of whether anyone applauds. Consistency replaces emotional bargaining. And then something changes. Uncertainty stops feeling like danger. A delayed response doesn't trigger a spiral. Silence becomes data, not a personal verdict. You observe, you adjust, you continue. Your sense of value stops being tethered to being chosen. It becomes rooted in behavior you can repeat. That is real confidence, repeatable self respect. Solitude also removes the need for distraction. Many people fear being alone because it forces them to face restlessness and unresolved impulses. Learning to sit in your own space without stimulation builds endurance. Evenings stop being something you escape. They become space to reflect, plan, learn, or simply exist without performing. This capacity is rare, and because it's rare, it becomes power. It also reshapes standards. A man who is comfortable alone becomes selective by default, not out of ego, out of efficiency. He understands that disorder introduces friction into a system that already works. So poor dynamics get recognized early and exited cleanly. No drama, no long speeches, no negotiations with disrespect. Strength developed in isolation doesn't announce itself. It shows up as restraint, timing, calm decisions, and people sense it without being able to name it. Now let's address a key point: how attraction changes when you stop needing it. There's a difference between trying to be desirable and being grounded. One is performance, the other is coherence. A man who seeks validation tends to overextend. He explains too much, promises too early, invests before reciprocity is established. Even if he never says he's anxious, his behavior communicates urgency. By contrast, a man who is internally steady allows interactions to unfold at a natural pace. He listens more than he speaks. He leaves space instead of filling it. He doesn't rush to secure outcomes. That calm is not indifference, it's self sufficiency. And ironically, it often generates more interest than effort ever could. Because a lot of modern dating is saturated with chasing, persuasion, and performance. So the man who isn't trying to win stands out. His time feels valuable because it isn't freely given away. He treats availability as a resource, not a virtue. The dynamic shifts without confrontation. The frame changes naturally. But let's be clear, this is not about games. This is not about acting mysterious. It's about not being emotionally dependent. It's about being stable enough that you don't need to secure attention to feel okay. Now, because modern dating is messy, endless options, low accountability, grounded presence alone isn't enough. You need discernment. Because even stable men can overinvest if they don't operate with a clean framework. Here are the rules that protect the deliberate man in 2026. First, observation over interpretation. Words are cheap. They can be optimized. Behavior costs something. So watch patterns, not promises. Does effort flow both ways? Do they follow through? Do they communicate clearly? Do they respect your time? If imbalance appears early, it rarely becomes balanced later. Second, proportional investment. Your emotional energy should rise only when there's evidence to support it. This prevents attachment built on imagination. Openness is not the same as exposure. You can be present without accelerating intimacy. Interest can exist without urgency. Third, clean exits. If you step back, do it without punishment and without negotiation. No speeches, no bargaining, no trying to teach a lesson. When alignment isn't there, leave early and quietly. Staying to be understood often costs more than leaving to stay aligned. Fourth, protect your rhythm. Training, work, sleep, finances. These aren't optional. A connection that constantly intrudes on your anchors isn't compatibility. It's consumption. Chemistry is not worth destabilizing your foundation. Fifth, availability without dependence. Show interest but don't orbit. Engage but don't chase. Be receptive, not reactive. This requires comfort with uncertainty. Most people try to control outcomes to reduce anxiety. The deliberate man lets outcomes reveal themselves while he protects his time and energy. That's not manipulation. That's self respect. Now, what does the future look like for the man who chooses this path? It doesn't look like isolation, it looks like selection. When a man learns to live well without external reinforcement, his standards stop being theoretical. They become embodied. His life already works. His days have shape. His direction doesn't depend on who enters or exits. So partnership stops being a solution and becomes an evaluation. Over time, his circle becomes smaller but cleaner. Fewer entanglements, fewer disruptions. Less time spent repairing damage caused by misalignment. The relationships that remain are calmer and more stable. They integrate into an existing structure rather than demanding he rebuild his life around them. He no longer confuses intensity with intimacy. He understands volatility is not passion, chaos is not depth, because his internal state is steady. He notices early when a dynamic introduces friction. He doesn't argue with reality, he adjusts. Walking away doesn't feel dramatic, it feels efficient. And staying doesn't require self betrayal. That is the real opt out in 2026, not rejection, withdrawal. Not because men can't date, because more men are deciding the return on investment has to make sense. And that's the line most of modern dating crossed without noticing. Here is the final point, and it's the one that matters most. Stop treating being alone like something you must escape. Start treating it like a foundation. Build discipline where distraction used to be. Build self-respect where validation used to be. Protect calm like it's an asset because it is. When a man no longer fears standing alone, he becomes impossible to rush, pressure, or corner. From that position, the future isn't something he hopes will happen to him. It's something he allows in carefully, selectively, on his terms. And that's the quiet shift the culture is struggling to name. In 2026, the deliberate single man isn't behind, he's positioned. If this message landed, use the comments like a field report. What are you seeing in your own life? Are you noticing men stepping back? Are you noticing the pressure to rush? And what did you gain when you stopped treating solitude like a problem? Subscribe if you want clear frameworks for modern dating, self respect, and building a life that doesn't collapse when attention changes.